What inmate eats inside Red Onion State Prison? The meal tray behind the mountain. High in the Appalachian Mountains of Virginia stands Red Onion State Prison, a super maximum security facility designed for the Commonwealth's most restrictive custody levels. It is a place built to control movement, limit contact, and reduce unpredictability. Every detail is regulated. Even food. What an inmate eats here is not a matter of preference. It is the result of policy, security classification, and tightly defined procedures, documented in state regulations, scrutinized by courts, and reported on by journalists for more than 2 decades. Tonight, we are examining, fact by fact, what inmates eat inside Red Onion State Prison. No rumors. No exaggeration. Only what is verifiable. If you value deeply researched, fully factual prison documentaries, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Beyond the Bars. Your support helps us continue sharing accurate, in-depth stories from inside the most restricted places in America. Why food matters in a Supermax. Red Onion State Prison opened in 1998 as Virginia's first Supermax facility. According to the Virginia Department of Corrections, it was designed primarily to house inmates assigned to Security Level S, the highest level in the state system. At this level, inmates typically spend 23 hours per day in their cells, with movement, recreation, and meals strictly controlled. Food, in this environment, serves multiple roles. Basic nutrition. Behavioral management. Institutional control. Compliance with constitutional standards. Unlike lower security prisons, meals are rarely eaten in a communal dining hall. At Red Onion, most meals are delivered directly to cells. This changes everything about how food is prepared, served, and consumed. Who decides what inmates eat? In Virginia, inmate meals are governed by Department of Corrections Operating Procedure 841.1, which outlines food service standards across all state facilities, including Red Onion. These rules require 3 meals per day. Nutritionally adequate portions. Menus reviewed and approved by a registered dietitian. Compliance with medical and religious dietary needs. The policy is not optional. Failure to meet these standards can result in internal audits, lawsuits, or federal scrutiny. Importantly, Red Onion does not have a unique, secret menu. Its food program follows the same statewide framework used across Virginia's prison system, though how the food is delivered and restricted differs significantly. The standard inmate menu. The standard Virginia prison menu operates on a rotating cycle, typically lasting several weeks. While exact daily menus are not always publicly posted for security reasons, they are referenced in court filings and investigative reporting. A typical day's meals may include breakfast, cereal or oatmeal, bread or biscuit, fruit or juice, milk, lunch, processed meat entree, such as bologna or hot dog-style items, starch like rice or potatoes, cooked vegetables, bread, dinner, entrees such as soy-based patties, chicken, or pasta, beans or vegetables, bread, dessert item on some days. These meals are designed to meet minimum caloric and nutritional standards established by dietitians contracted by the DOC. At Red Onion, these meals are usually served cold or lukewarm, due to security logistics and the time required to distribute trays cell by cell. Eating alone. For most inmates at Red Onion, meals are eaten alone, inside a concrete cell. There is no table. No chair beyond a fixed stool or bed. No social interaction. The tray is passed through a slot in the steel door. The inmate retrieves it. The slot closes. This process minimizes contact and reduces the risk of assaults, contraband exchange, or food being used as a weapon. Former inmates interviewed by journalists have consistently described the experience as silent, repetitive, and isolating, though accounts vary in tone and interpretation. What is consistent is this: food is one of the few daily events that breaks the monotony. Special diets and medical meals. Despite its reputation, red onion is legally required to accommodate medical diets, such as diabetic or heart-healthy meals. Religious diets, including halal, kosher style, or vegetarian. These meals are approved through formal documentation and reviewed periodically. However, multiple lawsuits and complaints have alleged delays, inconsistencies, or errors in receiving special meals. Claims that the Virginia DOC has sometimes disputed and sometimes corrected following internal reviews. The existence of a policy does not always guarantee flawless execution. The meal you never see on the menu. There is one food-related practice at Red Onion that has drawn national attention, one that is documented, litigated, and partially reformed. It involves disciplinary meals. Often referred to publicly as the loaf or Nutraloaf, this meal has been used in various U.S. prisons as a punishment for inmates who misuse food or throw bodily substances. At Red Onion, the exact formulation and frequency of use have changed over time, and in some periods, its use has been restricted or halted following legal challenges. What it is, when it has been used, and what courts have said about it. That is where this story turns. The disciplinary meal. For years, one meal at Red Onion State Prison drew more scrutiny than any other. Not because it was rare, but because it was disciplinary. Its official name varied by document. In court filings and media reports, it became known simply as the loaf. What the loaf actually is. The disciplinary meal commonly referred to as Nutraloaf is not unique to Virginia. Versions of it have been used in multiple state prison systems across the United States. According to court records and DOC descriptions, Nutraloaf is a dense, baked food item made by blending standard meal components. Designed to meet basic nutritional requirements. Served without utensils in some cases. In Virginia, the Department of Corrections has stated that any disciplinary meal used must meet minimum caloric and nutritional standards as reviewed by medical staff or dietitians. However, the exact ingredients and preparation methods have not always been publicly disclosed in detail, citing security and operational concerns. What is documented is how, and why, it was used. Why disciplinary meals were used. At Red Onion, disciplinary meals were historically authorized in specific circumstances, including repeatedly throwing food or liquids, using food trays as weapons, smearing or throwing bodily substances. These incidents are documented in correctional reports and referenced in legal proceedings. The rationale given by the DOC was behavioral control, to prevent food from being misused in ways that endangered staff or other inmates. Importantly, disciplinary meals were not meant to be permanent. They were imposed for limited periods, often measured in days, not weeks. Still, critics argued that even short-term use raised serious concerns. Legal challenges and lawsuits. By the early 2000s, Red Onion, and Virginia's use of disciplinary meals more broadly, became the subject of multiple lawsuits. Inmates alleged that the food was unpalatable to the point of nausea. Weight loss occurred during disciplinary periods. The practice constituted cruel and unusual punishment. The Virginia Department of Corrections countered that the meals met nutritional requirements. Use was temporary and behavior-based. Medical staff monitored affected inmates. Federal courts reviewed these claims on a case-by-case basis. In several rulings, courts found that nutritionally adequate disciplinary meals, when used briefly and with oversight, did not automatically violate the Eighth Amendment. However, courts also emphasized that misuse, extended duration, or failure to monitor inmate health could cross constitutional lines. Policy changes at Red Onion. As litigation continued and public scrutiny increased, Virginia's DOC made policy adjustments. By the 2010s, the use of disciplinary meals became more restricted. Additional approvals were required. Documentation and medical clearance became more explicit. According to reporting from advocacy organizations and state responses, Red Onion eventually reduced or eliminated routine use of Nutraloaf, though exact dates vary depending on the source. What is clear is that the practice no longer holds the same role it once did. Whether this change came from legal pressure, evolving standards, or administrative reform remains not fully documented in public records. What inmates eat today. As of the most recent publicly available information, inmates at Red Onion State Prison receive standard DOC-approved meals, modified diets when medically or religiously required, meals delivered to cells rather than eaten communally. There is no public evidence that disciplinary loaf-style meals are currently a routine practice at Red Onion. However, due to limited transparency and restricted media access, some operational details remain unclear. What is documented is that food remains one of the few constants in an otherwise tightly controlled environment. 3 times a day, the slot opens. 3 times a day, the routine repeats. The psychological weight of a meal. For inmates held in long-term segregation, food is more than nutrition. Psychologists and correctional experts have noted that in isolation settings, meals mark time. Changes in food can feel amplified. Eating becomes one of the few remaining personal acts. Former inmates interviewed by journalists have described food as both a comfort and a reminder of confinement. These accounts are subjective, varied, and not universal, but they appear consistently across reporting. What we don't know. Despite decades of reporting and litigation, there are limits to what is publicly documented about food inside Red Onion. Unknowns include exact daily menus at present, ingredient sourcing details, internal evaluations not released publicly. These gaps are not unusual for Supermax facilities, where security concerns often outweigh transparency. What we can say, factually, is this. Food at Red Onion is controlled, standardized, and shaped by policy, law, and history. And for the men who eat it, it remains one of the few tangible experiences of daily life. Commissary, the food you can buy. Inside Red Onion State Prison, most meals are identical. Regulated. Predictable. But there is one way an inmate's diet can change, slightly. It's called commissary. What commissary is and is not. Commissary, sometimes called canteen, is a system that allows inmates to purchase approved items using money in their institutional accounts. At Red Onion, commissary access exists, but it is more limited than in lower security prisons. According to Virginia DOC policy, commissary privileges depend on custody level and behavior. Items are pre-approved for security. Quantities are restricted. Orders are delivered on a schedule. For inmates in long-term segregation, commissary may be less frequent, more limited in selection, subject to suspension for disciplinary reasons. Commissary is a privilege, not a right. What food items are available? Publicly available commissary lists from Virginia facilities, submitted in court cases and advocacy reports, show that food options often include ramen-style noodles, peanut butter packets, cookies or snack cakes, chips, tuna or chicken packets, instant coffee or drink mixes. These items are shelf-stable, individually packaged, non-metallic or low-risk. Fresh food is not available through commissary at Red Onion. No produce. No refrigerated items. No hot meals. Money and access. Funds typically come from family or friends. Prison wages. Legal settlements or benefits. At Red Onion, prison jobs are limited due to security restrictions. Inmates who work often earn very small wages, consistent with state prison standards. This creates disparities. Inmates with outside financial support can supplement their diet. Those without it cannot. This difference has been cited in academic studies as a source of tension and inequality inside high-security prisons. Commissary as currency. In many prisons, commissary food functions as informal currency. At Red Onion, however, barter and exchange are strictly prohibited and heavily monitored due to segregation housing. That said, investigative reporting and inmate testimony suggest that food items still carry symbolic value. A sense of choice. A connection to the outside world. A break from institutional meals. Even when not traded, commissary food often becomes something inmates ration carefully. Discipline and food loss. Commissary privileges can be suspended for disciplinary reasons. This does not mean meals stop, but it removes access to supplemental food. Courts have consistently ruled that removing commissary does not violate constitutional standards. As long as basic meals continue and nutritional requirements are met. At Red Onion, loss of commissary can significantly affect morale, especially for inmates already in isolation. How often commissary is delivered? Exact schedules vary by housing unit and security level. Available documentation indicates orders are placed periodically, often weekly or bi-weekly. Food as a psychological anchor. Deliveries occur under staff supervision. Items are checked for contraband. Delays are not uncommon, especially during lockdowns, staff shortages, or security incidents. In a Supermax setting, commissary is always secondary to security. Food as a psychological anchor. Mental health professionals have noted that in extreme isolation, small rituals matter. Food preparation becomes a coping mechanism. Commissary items provide a sense of agency. Even simple acts, mixing noodles, saving a cookie, can take on outsized importance. These observations are drawn from clinical studies and interviews, not speculation. Limits of transparency. As with standard meals, there are limits to what the public can verify about commissary at Red Onion. Not publicly documented. Exact current item lists. Pricing changes over time. Internal evaluations of nutritional impact. What is clear is that commissary food, while limited, represents one of the only ways inmates can alter what they eat. And in a place built on uniformity, that difference matters. Nutrition, health, and the final record. At the end of every debate about prison food, one question remains unavoidable. Is it enough to keep someone alive and healthy? At Red Onion State Prison, that question has been examined by doctors, inspectors, judges, and auditors, often under legal pressure. This final section looks at what the record actually shows. Calories, standards, and oversight. Virginia Department of Corrections policy requires that all inmate meals meet or exceed minimum daily caloric requirements. Be reviewed by a qualified dietitian. Account for long-term consumption. Court filings referencing DOC standards indicate that meals are generally designed to provide approximately 2,600 to 2,800 calories per day, depending on menu cycle and dietary classification. This caloric range aligns with commonly cited correctional nutrition guidelines. Importantly, caloric sufficiency does not guarantee satisfaction or quality, but it is the primary benchmark used by courts when evaluating constitutional claims. Weight loss claims. In multiple lawsuits involving Red Onion inmates, plaintiffs alleged noticeable weight loss, fatigue or weakness, difficulty eating certain meals. Medical records reviewed in court often showed short-term weight changes, particularly during disciplinary periods or illness. However, courts consistently distinguished between temporary weight fluctuation and medically dangerous malnutrition. In most reviewed cases, judges found insufficient evidence of systemic starvation, though they cautioned that individual cases still required monitoring. Medical monitoring. Policy requires that inmates receiving restricted or modified diets be monitored by medical staff. Removed from special food status if health declines. Evaluated for hydration and weight loss. Failures in monitoring, when proven, have led to policy corrections rather than facility-wide rulings. There is no public record of a federal court finding Red Onion's food program, as a whole, unconstitutional. That distinction matters. Inspections and audits. Red Onion, like other Virginia prisons, is subject to internal DOC audits, Health Department inspections, litigation-driven reviews. While reports have cited concerns related to isolation, mental health, and conditions of confinement, food service violations have not been identified as a primary systemic failure in publicly released findings. This does not mean the system is flawless, only that documented violations have been limited and addressed administratively. Food and isolation. Correctional researchers emphasize that food cannot be separated from context. At Red Onion, meals are eaten alone. Social interaction is minimal. Sensory deprivation is common. Studies on long-term segregation show that even adequate nutrition can feel insufficient when combined with isolation. This is not a matter of calories, but of environment. These findings are widely documented in academic literature and DOJ studies. What the record ultimately shows. Here is what can be stated with certainty. Inmates at Red Onion are provided 3 meals per day. Menus are standardized and dietitian approved. Commissary offers limited supplementation. Disciplinary meals were used historically, but are now restricted or discontinued. Courts have not found the food program, by itself, unconstitutional. What cannot be proven? That meals are consistently palatable. That food alleviates the psychological strain of isolation. That every inmate experiences the system the same way. Food at Red Onion does its legal job. Whether it does anything more is an open question. The slot closes. Inside Red Onion State Prison, food is not a privilege. It is a function. Measured. Regulated. Delivered through steel. 3 times a day, a tray appears. And in a place built to remove choice, that tray becomes one of the last remaining constants. If you appreciate deeply researched, fully factual documentaries like this one, consider liking the video and subscribing to Beyond the Bars. Your support allows us to keep telling accurate stories from places most people never see. Thank you for watching.